Well, hello everybody. It's Joe Chaffee. We finally made it to a Friday on what was a pretty interesting week overall, and now we are headed into a weekend where there isn't a whole lot going on in the short range. We continue to be in this weather pattern where we are getting these shots of cold air coming through every couple of days, and another one is due to come through here in the eastern part of the United States Saturday night, bringing with it some cold air for Sunday and Monday. So ahead of it on Saturday, we have a very subpar warm-up to look forward to. We'll be back into the 60s. A little bit of shower activity will accompany that. And then next week overall looks pretty quiet. Another shot of cold air coming in for later Tuesday that'll settle in for Wednesday and Thursday. And then after that, we look toward next weekend, where weather models continue to kind of trying to decipher this puzzle with regards to a storm for the eastern part of the United States and maybe a low up the East Coast if the European has its way from today. But I'm going to get into a couple of things with regards to what's going on overall, because I think we need to just understand what's happening in the atmosphere and with the changes, and then we can take a look at how the models handle all this. But first things first, let's bring up a couple of maps with regards to the weather at the moment, because it is fairly quiet as far as the Weather Prediction Center's rainfall forecast for this week. We are going to start to see some ample amounts coming into the Pacific Northwest. Again, this is for the next 7 days, so it takes us through Friday. Still getting hit with some heavy rains along the entire Texas coast from Brownsville to Beaumont, Port Arthur. Lesser amounts as you go north and west, but there still could be another couple of inches of rain or more in some places. And then across the Gulf states, it lessens a little bit, an inch to a bit more. And then up the East Coast, we really don't have too much happening rainfall-wise this week. Most of the rainfall amounts actually are under a quarter of an inch, and in some cases even under a tenth of an inch. Dry throughout most of the plains, dry in most of California, and you've got a little bit of action in the Southwest. Again, this is only through next Friday, as the pattern looks to be on the quiet side for a good part of this week. Now, one of the things that's happening this weekend is we are seeing a change with a cold front coming. So why don't we bring up the U.S. surface map here, and we'll take a look at that, and before we get into the upper air. By the way, I want everybody to have a nice weekend, okay? I just wanted to say that up front and center. Make sure you have a nice weekend. There's some really nice fall colors going on at the moment now in parts in upstate New York, and you don't have to go that far from the coast, about an hour to an hour and a half north. From there northward, the color change has been significant. So take your choice, either there or certainly up into much of interior New England, now beginning to see some color change. And of course, with this colder weather pattern that we have, it may accelerate that change further south over the next couple of weeks. Now, here's the GFS for tonight. We do have actually some showers on the radar at the moment in parts of Indiana into Ohio. Nothing especially heavy. And this front will approach during tomorrow morning. Those showers might just kind of clip my neck of the woods around a few hours before daybreak and just shortly after daybreak. Then they're going to be gone. I think we're going to go partly sunny. Then the cold air starts coming in tomorrow night and Sunday, and it might actually be rather windy on Sunday at times as low pressure strengthens up in the Maritimes, and you've got a high there in Missouri, so the pressure gradient is pretty tight. But other than this is Sunday morning, some snow shower activity going on maybe in parts of eastern Pennsylvania, western New York, some flurry activity there, and then gone. So Sunday night into Monday morning, We've got the high coming in, so winds drop off. We'll probably have a round of frost and freezes down into the mid-Atlantic states again. Here comes the next cold front. Moves on through here, sometime on Tuesday. And then we've got a high that comes down from the western Great Lakes. Another shot of cold air. Nothing particularly strong. There's a pretty good northerly flow coming down from eastern Canada. So the air is likely to be rather cool. This is the new GFS that's just started. I'm going to back up one run so we can take it a little bit further. Again, much of next week is quiet. You see some of the rains back through parts of Texas with overrunning. And then we're going to start to see a couple of things happen. First off, a question of whether there will be a tropical storm of some kind, or maybe even a minimal hurricane going into Mexico south of Baja. Some of that moisture and energy will get translated back over into Texas perhaps next weekend. And this is where we're going to watch to see if some kind of low develops. And of course, from here, models handle things rather differently. And this is where I'm going to stop it. And I'm going to bring the paint box up, because I want to show you where we're going with. Actually, before we even do the paint box, hang on just a second. Let's go to the teleconnections, because we are going to see some changes here in the teleconnections going forward that are really important to us. We've been seeing this over the last few days, and today's run of the GFS ensembles overnight really pretty much continue the trend. Excuse me, just taking a little sip of tea. We are going to see that NAO, the North Atlantic Oscillation, is going to go negative in a few days, and it stays negative all of next week, right in at least into the first days of November, based on last night's overnight run. And I don't see anything today that would change that. The Pacific North America Index is strongly positive through much of next week. Now, the GFS does weaken it a little bit. It's still remaining positive, but does weaken it a bit going into next weekend, and then starts to build it again as we head toward the last days of October and into the month of November. These two signals to me are pretty important, because we are seeing these changes in the high latitudes that's going to be setting us up for a chilly and active pattern ahead going into the month of November. And if we hold on to this pattern toward the end of November, it would not shock me in the least if we wind up seeing some early snowfalls in the Northeast, and maybe even in places a little bit further south than that. This is an open speculation on my part. Again, let me repeat that. If the pattern holds, if this were to hold you get into the middle and latter part of November, and you start to see progressively colder shots of air coming down from Canada with these teleconnections like this, then you start to look to see if there's a possibility of something setting up for an early snowfall. We're not there yet, okay? But just very interesting that, it's October 19th, and to see a pattern like this early is pretty unusual. And it's certainly the total opposite of what we've seen in the last several years, where we've been fighting a big ridge along the East Coast. One of my regulars on, I believe it was on Facebook, pointed out last night that the first frosts in the New York area, the New York, New Jersey, Connecticut area, happened this year a full 23 days sooner than they did last year. We were in almost into the middle of November before the first frosts and freezes showed up, and it wasn't long after that before the bottom fell out with the temperatures a couple of weeks later. And then, of course, we know what happened in December, how very, very cold it was, and we had an early snowfall, as I recall, in the month of December last year. So these teleconnections, again, telling us that we've got an interesting pattern coming up. And I think what displays it pretty well, and I'm going now to the end of this forecast period on the European. I've got the paint box up. What I've put up here is the hemispheric view. So you're actually looking at the land masses as being flat and the North Pole being in the upper center of this picture. One of the important takeaway from all of this is if you look up in the polar region, you have higher than normal pressures building all across the polar regions. Some of it coming up around Canada through eastern Greenland, some of it coming up through western Greenland, and some of it coming up through eastern Greenland. But all this area and all through the poles, we're seeing higher than normal pressures here, and that is displacing the jet stream well to the south, running down well south into the Pacific. You have a trough that's right along right near 160 degrees west down near Hawaii. You have a strong ridge that winds up building up the west coast, corresponding deep trough in the east, strong ridge out in the Atlantic along about 50 degrees west and building northwestward. So you've got this setup that in December, January, and February would be very, very dynamic and quite interesting to say the least. This time of year, it's certainly interesting from the standpoint that the cold air masses that we've been getting are taking temperatures down close to, in some cases, 15 or more degrees below average. So this is cold for this time of year. You're not going to see it much colder than this during this time of year. You know, maybe a little bit colder if you want to talk about record cold, and we haven't really seen anything like that. But nonetheless, it is pretty impressive. Now, let's go to the upper air. We're going to use the European model today with the upper air, and I'm going to start with the 48-hour forecast, which is going to take us into Sunday morning. Here's where that cold front has already come through. Deep trough now in the eastern part of the United States. Got a strong ridge building up in the west, that deep trough out at 160, and you've got some ridging beginning out in the open waters of the Atlantic. So our flow coming down right out of northwest Canada, so you can understand why we're going to get this shot of cold air on Sunday. Now I'm going to jump to the 120 hour. Okay, so we're going to go 3 days into the future, and this is where things start happening, because there will be a second trough and shortwave that will move through on Tuesday. And at this point, because we are at Wednesday, it's already by. It's not quite as impressive as what's coming in on Sunday, but nonetheless, it does bring down some colder air. But here's where we start to see some changes. Out in the North Atlantic, north of the Azores, you're starting to get higher pressures building. You have a ridge, the flow kind of splits a bit in the west. You do have a ridge up in the Pacific Northwest. You still have this deep trough that is out at about 160 degrees west with a low sitting over the Aleutians, a rather deep low. There's also some energy here down in the southwest. And this is going to, at least for the eastern part of the United States, it's going to continue to be on the dry side through much of, if not all of the work week next week. But that energy in the southwest is important. And we also have some energy that's getting kicked out of the upper low that's in the Aleutians, that's coming into the Pacific Northwest and crashing that ridge just a little bit. So we'll go down to the European, we'll go jump another 2 days ahead, and we'll go to the end of next week, and we're at 168 hours now. So this is a week from today. So that southwestern energy is now moved here into from the Great Lakes down into Texas. You have the trough that's off the East Coast. You've got this energy that's up here in the Pacific Northwest. There's still a little bit of ridging. So this is where, you know, that PNA index, when it came down a little bit, it's because of the fact that you have that ridge getting crashed a bit into the Pacific Northwest. But you still have this deep trough down at 160 with this low in the Aleutians. So as soon as this short wave that's up in the northwest moves far enough east, the ridge is going to want to fly back up again. And indeed, that's where we go out to 240 hours, which is day 10. And by this time, I'm skipping the part in between because I'm going to show that to you separately. But from there, we go to the 240 hour. By the way, before we even do that, note, big upper high here building out in the Atlantic toward Greenland. You have another upper high in the polar regions north of Alaska. So this is the pressure is building across the high latitudes of the polar region, displacing that whole jet stream pattern way to the south. Think back to last March when we had this happen after that big warm-up in the stratosphere. This is something that the European has been telegraphing rather strongly for quite some time now, and the European model in its long range wants to hold on to this signature for a good chunk of November and December and maybe even beyond that, with perhaps only some minor interruptions in between. I don't know if that's right. I mean, I'm just telling you what the model's showing, but it's very interesting that this signature is developing the way it is. Now, when we go out to 240 hours, I had showed you the hemispheric, so now I'm just going to show you the North American view. And at 240 hours, you're seeing a very deep trough here in the eastern part of the U.S. By this time, which is next Monday, a storm will have been long gone, and there's probably a really decent shot of cold air that's coming in. And this shot of cold air gets all the way down into Florida, by the way, if this trough is as deep as the model is showing. And again, big ridge builds out in the west now because all that energy that crashed the ridge originally gets over to the other side of the plains, and then you still have the this deep system sitting near the Aleutians. That barely moves through the whole period. That's key, by the way, through this whole pattern, is the fact that you've got that low that's out there, because that is what is responsible for flying the ridge up in the west. If that Aleutian low, instead of being east of the Aleutians, were more toward the western part of the Aleutians, then you would have the ridge in the Gulf of Alaska, then you would have the trough in the west and a ridge in the east. But the model's, again, signaling that that Aleutian low is going to just stay locked in. And here's that upper high built northward up about 50 west, all the way up west of Greenland, and you've got higher than normal pressures all through the polar regions. The AO, the Arctic oscillation, is going to go negative, and that is a cold signal for the eastern part of the United States, assuming that this verifies. And if we when we were in December last year, I don't know if it was in December, we had the negative AO last March, which was part of that whole blocking scenario that we had with the 4 nor'easters. Nothing works out the same way, by the way. I'm not you gotta things do rhyme, but they never repeat exactly. You don't know where the mean trough position is going to set up exactly, even though you have these indices in favorable positions for storms along the East Coast, and that becomes our short-term model issue. So let's go back now to the GFS. And by the way, I assume I wasn't paying too close attention, so I hope you guys were able to see that all with the paint box. And I had it up correctly. I'm hoping that I did. Okay, so now let's come back to the GFS on the new one. I want to go back to the new one and see what it's doing. Once again, remember that it's going to be about timing. Okay, we're still not out far enough, by the way. So we'll go to the European at this point. And unfortunately, we only have the 24-hour increments to look at, but that's the way it is, so we'll just deal with what we got. And here's the European. Okay. Now, starting from Monday, There's your high, the shot of cold air that comes in Sunday into Monday. We've got another cold front on Tuesday. Low pressure in western New York goes into the Gulf of Maine. Well, it might be maybe a little bit of snow there on the western side of that up in northern New England. And here comes your hurricane that comes in south of Baja into Mexico. You've got low pressure sitting in western Louisiana on Thursday. Starts to stretch toward the coast on Friday. And then it turns up the eastern seaboard and strengthens Saturday into a major storm as it moves up into northern New England and on up into eastern Canada as we go into Sunday and into Monday. It's a pretty straightforward look on the European because of the fact that when we look at the upper air, and we'll roll it back now. So here's your trough for Sunday. Here's your shot for Tuesday into Wednesday. Look back in the plains. You've got your energy there that is moving eastward, and then it continues to amplify a bit. The trough in the east pulls out. Now we're into Friday, where we've got this trough running from the Great Lakes down into Texas. That energy that's up in the northwest moves rapidly eastward, picks up that trough that's now it's trying to catch it, picks up that trough that's axis from Detroit down southwestward to New Orleans, and it lifts it up in almost a negatively tilted fashion. When I say negative tilt, the tilt of this trough is northwest to southeast, and that is when you get really strong energy and you get these surface lows to intensify. A lot of height fall that occurs in the east when this trough lifts up, and you wind up with a fairly intense surface low that moves northward. And then, of course, by the time we get to day 10, you've got this very, very cold trough here in the eastern part of the United States. This is an unusually strong trough for this time of year. The GFS is a little bit different. We don't have enough of it from this current run. It looks like it's kind of similar to the European, except that maybe it's a little bit slower in getting this trough in the east out of the way on Friday. So that might have some impact. I'll go back one run. Yeah, I mean, looking at the new run, that upper low actually takes longer to get out of the way. And see, this is where it becomes an issue, is a question of which model's got a better handle on this, because the GFS actually wants to move that first trough further east and keeps it weaker. The second energy comes, it doesn't really get to pick it up, so it just kind of dives down further south, and all of that sort of gets squashed underneath initially, and it actually brings something up later in the period. This would be for Monday night and Tuesday up the East Coast, and it's got a series of these systems moving along in the pattern in the long range. And the surface works out totally different, by the way. So here's your surface low. See, the GFS has it kind of flatter and further south, kicks that first low out almost east-northeast and never really gets it up here, and then it waits for the energy with the second system that it comes up and brings up the East Coast a couple of days later. I don't know. I mean, when I looked at the European to be kind of made sense because it just there was a continuity to it where the GFS doesn't have that, and I was trying to look for some of the differences in the model, and where those differences show up actually, I think, is in the upper air with respect to the blocking scenario, because the GFS, I think the big difference is if you look out in the North Atlantic, the GFS actually builds this blocking high and holds it there right through the weekend. It holds that low in the Aleutians. So let's watch the low in the Aleutians. Okay, it doesn't really move. It just stays there right along 160. Just rotates around and around with energy rotating around and around. Just gets reinforced. The GFS also at the same time builds this upper high in the Atlantic and then starts to build it northwestward toward Greenland, which is something that the European doesn't quite do. It initially builds it, but then it weakens it and doesn't build it back again until around day 10, where it builds a very, very strong ridge out from 50 west on up through just west of Greenland, and on up northward from there. Both models have the idea of the higher than normal pressures developing over the polar regions in the long term. So from that standpoint, they are both consistent. I want to see how far the new run is out. And unfortunately, it's only out to 162 hours. But here's the new run versus the old run. And you can see on the new run, look in eastern Canada here. It's got a much deeper upper low. This would suggest that the cold shot that comes in on Tuesday, that it actually could stay quite chilly here into Friday, if this is correct, at least in the eastern part of the U.S. And if that upper low doesn't get out of the way, there may not be a whole lot of room for something along the East Coast. Doesn't mean it's right, but again, it's always the situation here when we have all these different puzzle pieces and trying to see them and how they come together. By the way, on the 10-day, going out through day 10, as far as snow cover growth is concerned, and of course, you know, we're starting to push toward the end of the month, so the snow cover, the rate of snow cover growth is important. In North America, it continues at a fairly rapid pace, although there might wind up being a little bit of melting there in parts of southwestern Canada because of the fact that you have that upper high building. But at least it does appear that we are going to see a substantial increase in snow and snow cover across much of Canada, but particularly in eastern Canada during the next 10 days. And also snows for northwest Canada and Alaska, which have been sorely lacking at the moment. And the GFS, at least, was pretty bullish today. We've been talking about the fact that snow cover growth in Siberia has been decidedly subpar. Well, here's the growth over the next 10 days, and it looks like it is going to be playing a little bit of catch-up. This is going to take us out to about October 29th if it's correct. So we are going to see a little bit of a pickup in the snow cover growth over Siberia and even into Eurasia, but will it be enough to take the Siberian snow cover growth rate off its lows? That is a big question. Always remember that there are no magic bullets. I've said that, you know, how many times have I said that, folks? No magic bullet as to any one indicator that's going to tell us just exactly what kind of winter we're going to have. I don't know. I know that the NOAA put out its winter forecast. It's heavily based on the weak El Nino developing. But that seems for them seems to be front and center. They aren't using, even though it has been brought up to them that maybe they should take a look at this whole concept of snow cover growth, but they don't weave that into their forecast. You know, they always throw in the caveat that the NAO, the Greenland block, could rear its ugly head at any time with regards to snows and cold weather in the eastern part of the United States. But that is a highly volatile variable, so they don't really consider that in their forecast either. It's just pretty much El Nino or no El Nino, La Nina or no La Nina. And it seems to me like every year they put out a forecast where the winters are going to be above normal temperature-wise, and that has not always been the case. Here's the current radar, by the way, and I just wanted to show you here at the Storm Prediction Center, no severe weather is being forecast. So I'm going to come to the chat board right now. So let me bring this up to the top. Let me also just really fast. We actually did we have a live chat capability on the Patreon platform, and I actually did test out a live chat this morning with the group for a short time, and it did work out well, so we will be doing that. The Patreon platform has all my website posts, no ads. I respond to comments in a timely fashion, and you can message me and I can respond in a timely fashion. We've been doing some live exclusive videos from time to time on Patreon for just Patreon members only, and now we have the ability for live chat. So do consider joining the Patreon platform for additional weather. It's just $2 a month, and that $2 is the price of a cup of coffee. Goes a long way to support what I'm doing on YouTube, on Facebook, websites, and so on. And thank you very much for those of you who have signed up. Many of you have openly said, without me urging you to say it, that you're liking what I've done so far. Also, let me just let you know, my app is done. It is being submitted to Google and Apple even as we speak. And hopefully in the next couple of weeks, I'll have it. I've been told that the Google approval process is pretty quick. I'm told that the Apple approval process is not pretty quick. So for those of you who are not on iPhones, as soon as the app comes out, I will give you I'll tell you where to go to download it. It is going to be free, so that's a big plus. And it's the forecasts that are going to be on it are going to be for the area that I cover, which is basically eastern Pennsylvania to southern New England. And you'll get those discussions. If you're outside that area, of course, we do a lot of the long range too, and you at least will be able to get it with notifications, and you don't have to rely on getting a notification or not getting a notification, whether it be on Facebook or on Twitter. So as soon as I get the app, I will let you know. And Patreon users, of course, will get the app front and center. So you guys will be getting it as well, and we'll keep it there for a little while until it feels good to everybody, and then I'll probably do a full public release, hopefully before the winter gets underway. So back to the chat board we go. Hope everybody's got at least some plans on a Friday night, because it is a weekend. I am going to try to get some fishing done this weekend. I don't know. And ZUK416B, haven't seen you in a while. The autumn is my favorite time of year as well. I love this time of year. The colder weather coming, the leaf changing. I don't like the cleanup that's involved. But then again, I don't think anyone does. But I just love this time of year, especially coming off the horrifically humid summer that we had here in my neck of the woods. And I know up in the UK, in Ireland, this was also a very hot summer indeed. Okay. Timothy Parrish had to scrape the frost off the car in North Middle Tennessee. Yeah, we had frost and freezes up and down, except for the warmer urban areas around here: New York City, Newark, Jersey City, Hoboken, Philadelphia. Those areas did not get down low enough, but just about everybody else did. So we've had that first frost and freezes, and again, coming 23 days earlier than we did last year. So we're at the 19th at 12/7, so right around November 7th, November 8th, with the first frost last year. And Johnny Quest still has so much water on the ground that the rivers are still running above normal. You're going to get at least a break next week, because there's not going to be that much happening, so that should start to come down. And by the way, Delvin, you reminded me, right after on the first Sunday of November, when we go back to standard time, I can't wait, because then we'll have the models an hour earlier. We will also have the European at night an hour earlier. So on storm situations, I'll stay up for it if I have most of it done by 1:30 or 1:45. But I don't stay up much past that. I got to get some sleep. So I like the fact, and then the NAM, of course, starts coming in at 9 o'clock, which is great, and then the GFS starts at 10:30 a.m. and 10:30 p.m. So just having those models an hour earlier makes so much of a difference. Frankly, I wish they would just have standard time all year round. I really don't see the point of daylight saving time anymore. Chris Case, you've got my thoughts on what's going on pattern-wise going forward. So we'll see how it goes. Just trying to see. We got Seth Dominus is on tonight. 5,000 subscribers with no videos. Stephen Franco, Stephen White, William Huber, Chris Eddy. All good evening to you, and good evening to everybody. Justin King. It's hard once I start saying hello to everybody. I feel bad when I miss somebody. I'm just running through all your questions. Okay. All right, let's see. Patricia Jackson, you're going to the State Fair in Columbia, South Carolina on Sunday. Nice. Very good. At least the weather through much of the east is going to be dry for all of this week, and reasonable for this time of year down your way. Although you're going to get some of that cold air that's coming down with the big high building in, so you're going to taste a little bit of that, but it'll still be pretty good. Stephen White, you're reminiscing about that 2011 hot summer. Yeah, not for me. As I get older, the heat bothers me more and more. Johnny Quest, if that storm pans out late next week, do you see some snow in the mountain areas where I live? Well, you know what? The European, by the way, I noticed on one of the all the different sites that you can go and see some of these models. I did see some posts of the European model with the Storm Vista, I believe, and it showed snow near the low center as it moved northward. It actually had it over southern New England and over me when the low moves north because of the very, very cold upper air feature aloft, and that's what's going to drive this. But I guess it has to do with whatever algorithm they use to calculate, where the range snow line is, because I looked at it on one of the other sites, EuroWeather, which is the one I use, and it didn't have anything quite like that. It had some snow well up to the north in upstate New York and in parts of New England. Now, that being said, I'll say it this way. I'll answer it this way for you, Johnny. In instances where you've had early snow down your way this time of year, it's usually because you have a really, really strong upper low and very, very cold air aloft, and somewhere a storm of size is underway in terms of what's going on at the surface. So I would have to just kind of defer for a few days until we see how the whole upper air evolves. If we wind up getting some sort of really deep trough with a wrapped up cutoff low that comes over you, then I wouldn't be shocked in elevated areas, because you'll wind up getting dynamic cooling from the top down, and that's that's something to some degree. That's what happened when Sandy came inland, for example, and you guys got heavy snows in the mountains of West Virginia out of that. So it would play out that way. It wouldn't play out the way a storm might play out normally during the winter time. Patricia Jackson got to Florence, South Carolina, got to 38, a low of 38. That's the forecast for Sunday night. So you are going to get into some of that that colder air. Javon Johnson forecasting a low of 39 in Lexington, South Carolina. How cold do I think next weekend's trough will be in the Northeast? How far south the cold air would expand? 5,000 subscribers. Well, assuming if the European is right, it would be, after the storm goes by, and you got that deep trough like that, I think it could be pretty cold for this time of year. Freezes probably extending down into the mid-Atlantic states, so early freezes going pretty far south, and frosts going fairly far to the south. Again, we're still in October, so this pattern a month from now would be much more dynamic from the standpoint of cold and snow than what we're seeing here at this point of the calendar. But it's going to be interesting to see as we go forward if the European long range, which by the way did a pretty good job, as I recall, last winter, particularly in the second half. It'll be interesting to see if the European long range, which has a rather bullish view on the start of the winter, an early start to the winter, if it winds up being correct. So we'll see. All right, folks. So I'm going to put a link up now to my Patreon page and Patreon platform. Okay, so there it is. So for those of you who are who would like to consider joining the Patreon platform, the link is up there for you, and I appreciate it very much. Again, the subscription tier starts at $2 a month. That pretty much gets you into everything. I haven't been separating posts based on tiers. It's just that if the the higher scripts are for people who need me to do extra work for them. You know, if you take the $2 tier, it's fine. If you're feeling more generous, that's great too. So there's the link for that. I'm also, by the way, I'm actually starting to work my Instagram, which I had for a while, and I really didn't do very much with it because I'm very busy on Facebook and less so on Twitter. So you can only be on you know, so many platforms at once on a given day, and you have to actually live a life every once in a while. So if you're interested, I'm Joe WXMAN on Instagram, JOEWXMAN on Facebook. I'm meteorologist Joe Chaffee. Joe and I, you know, we haven't discussed it yet. Sometimes on Fridays we tend to be a little bit tired, so we don't always get to do the Joe and Joe Weather Show on Friday night because either one of us or both of us at that point just wants to go home for the night. But we'll try. I'll see how he feels about it. If he's up to it, then we'll go ahead and do it. And that's on my Facebook page, Meteorologist Joe Chaffee, at 9:15 Eastern Time. I'll be doing some live streams over the weekend at some point, but I'm just not quite sure when. Patreon platform, folks, be on the lookout for notifications for another live chat at some point, and we'll start to do that as well. And you will probably be getting a live video over the weekend. Joseph Arabia, I don't know if you got on late. There is a we just to repeat what I had earlier. We actually did a live chat this morning. We have a live chat capability on Patreon. So just watch for your notifications. It'll just be a straight chat with no video. When we do the videos, you'll get that notification as well. But that's a new thing I tried this morning and it worked. So we'll be adding new things. Don't forget, hopefully in the next couple of weeks, new app will come out, and we'll let you know about that, and it'll be free. So I'll just give you the link, and you can go ahead and take a look at it. All right, folks. Have a great rest of your Friday. Go out and have some fun tonight and have some fun over the weekend. And we will talk to you either later, or we'll probably see you maybe at some point over the weekend.